This is what happened. Yesterday morning, Pastor Ken not feeling so great. Last night, about 9:45, Michael, 10 o'clock, whatever hour it was, I was getting ready to go to bed. I still needed to brush my teeth. That takes about 2 hours. So I factored that in. Michael's call alerted me to the fact, possibility, that Pastor Ken might not be able to make it in the morning because he went to the emergency room and they weren't sure what the outcome of that was going to be. So just in case, I forget his exact words. I think it sounded something like this. It's 99 out of 100 chance he'll be there, but there's a 1% chance he will not be there. So just in case. Was that it, Michael? I don't think that was it. Anyway, whatever it was, I was kind of on alert. So I finish my teeth and I go to bed. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to sleep, if there's something really in the front of my mind, when I lay my head on the pillow, it lays next to me for a while. You know what I mean? It doesn't just go away. You close your eyes, but you're not asleep. So at 1 o'clock, I'm thinking about morning. At 2 o'clock, I'm thinking about morning. At 3 o'clock, I'm thinking about morning. 4 o'clock, I think, why don't you just get up? 6:20, phone rings. Michael, we need you. Pastor Ken's not going to make it. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't shower and shave and get ready to leave in 5 or 6 minutes. It takes me a little more than that. So I had to do some basic stuff. And then I had to sit down and contemplate, now what do you do? I think the service starts at 9 o'clock. I'm pretty sure it's today. And they want you to be there. I came up with 2 plans, plan A, plan B. Plan A, I looked at the text the night before, 6th chapter of Luke, Sermon on the Plain, familiar material. You heard it read. Love everybody. Go out of your way to be accommodating. Someone swats you, don't swat them back. If they want your shirt, give them your whole wardrobe. The whole thing, you know. There's stuff you can do with that. And I'm obviously old, so I've done stuff with that. However, I've usually taken more than a half hour to prepare what I'm going to do. So I looked at this. I looked at the first lesson, Genesis, the story of Joseph. We all know it. Joseph, the boy of many colored coat, who made his brothers jealous because their father, Jacob, loved him more than the others. So they sell him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. Eventually they come back together. You know the story. I could talk about that for a while. And then I concluded this. Whatever you do in a half hour or 45 minutes is probably going to be like a loaf of bread that kind of didn't make it all the way to the end of the baking process. I think they call it half-baked. It was going to be half-baked. I went to seminary. They tried to teach me how to preach. That was a challenge. So I do the best I can with what I learned, but I think I missed the day when they said, prepare a sermon in 46 minutes. I mean, Pastor Stunkel can tell you, and Pastor Stubbe can tell you, and Pastor Arnold can tell you. And if I call on any of you to come up and help me, please come quickly. Usually, you start with a text and you do some homiletical preparation, and you study the text and you think about the circumstances and you try to put it all together. I apologize, but I cannot do that in 46 minutes in a way that you want to sit and listen to me talk. So that was plan A, which I pondered. Then I came up with plan B. Here's plan B. Kind of remember things that have been meaningful to you forever in your life, in your ministry, and try to draw some conclusions from those experiences that might connect in a meaningful way with those assembled here today and communicate the Word of God, at least in part. Give it a try. Plan A, plan B. Plan A, I've done many times, normally with a little more preparation. Plan B, never done this before. I warned the folks at the early service, I don't mean to be insulting here, but you basically are guinea pigs. Because I've never done this before, like this. I've done the first one more times than you can count. But the second one's a little different, but I opted for plan B. So here we are. Plan B. Apologies to anyone who may not think plan B is what a Sunday morning sermon should be about. Forgiveness would be appreciated. Okay? First thing I want to share with you goes back a lot of years to early days of ministry. I was privileged many years ago to be called into the Synod office to serve as an assistant to the bishop of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod of the Lutheran Church in America at that time. It's a long time ago. And I had responsibilities in the Synod. I worked very closely with the bishop, Dr. William Jansen. Dr. Jansen and I both lived in a town called Lansdale, which is north of Philadelphia, and we drive into work, the office, wasn't work. I've never worked, actually. We drove into the office together when our schedules allowed. And we had a lot of conversations. So I got to know him as a person as well as a bishop and another pastor and as a, I guess you could say, boss. But one of the things I'll never forget about Dr. Jansen is something he shared with me, and then I saw it happening over and over again, because we'd be at services together, installation, dedications, pastor leaving, whatever it is. So he's there, I'm there as the assistant, and we're doing the service, and he would preach, and he would often use this example. He told a story about going to preach one Sunday morning in one of the Synod congregations, Percy, Pennsylvania, north of Philadelphia, near Sellersville, if you know any of those places. And he went to the pastor's, got there early. Pastor wasn't there yet. And he was escorted into the pastor's office to await the arrival of the pastor. And he was gathering his thoughts. He looks at the wall of the pastor's office, St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, Percy, Pennsylvania. I was in that church many times. And on the wall is something that intrigued him. It was a tennis racket. His first thought was, Pastor Hatfield must play a lot of tennis. His second thought was, there's no way Pastor Hatfield is going to play tennis with that tennis racket, because the tennis racket was basically a piece of junk. It was falling apart everywhere it could fall apart. The handle wrappings was unfolding. The strings were all over the place. The frame was obviously cracked. If you're headed to Wimbledon, don't take this racket. It's not going to help you. Bad condition. Pastor Hatfield arrives. He's curious. He says to Pastor Hatfield, "What's that tennis racket doing on the wall of your office?" Pastor Hatfield smiled, and he told him the story. "Well, I go to a place called Perkiomenville. I went there occasionally. It was one of the most gigantic flea markets you'd ever see. And they had so much stuff there, just table after table after table of stuff that was for sale. Pastor Hatfield walked by a table, and on that table was an old broken down tennis racket. He looked at it, laughed, kept walking, thought to himself, who would buy something like that? Looked at other tables, came back by that table, it was still there, he was not surprised. Looked at some other tables, came back, it was still there, he still wasn't surprised. Came back, saw it sitting there, still was not surprised. Found himself walking to his car with the tennis racket in hand. He had bought that piece of junk. Now what's he going to do with it? His thinking was this. He went into theological mode. Here's a piece of broken down old junk that nobody wants. I'm going to put it on the wall in my office. I'm going to take this thing that's not worth much to most of the world and give it a place of prestige. I'm going to give it value. I'm going to give it purpose. I'm going to give it identity. A piece of junk. Dr. Jansen would take that example and he would say, you know, basically we are kind of broken down. We're by nature sinful. We kind of miss the mark. We don't live up to God's expectations, but he doesn't let us sit on the flea market table. He takes us, redeems us, puts us in a place of prominence. He was right. That's exactly what happened. And he would relate it to this verse, 1 Peter Paul's letter to 1 Peter, chapter 2, verse 9. Listen to these words and think about the tennis racket, because we are kind of like tennis rackets, folks. Again, I don't want to insult you, but that's kind of the way we start, needing what only God can give, right? Here's what it says. But you are a chosen race. The broken down tennis rackets are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people. Think about that. We're God's own people. In order that, three important words, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness, off that table at the flea market, into light, a prominent place on the wall of the pastor's office. Amazing. Once you were no people, but now you are God's people. Now we are God's people. So what I'd like to say to you is, let's live like God's people. Let's live like God would have us live. Let's try to let the world know that, yeah, we're redeemed and we're going to make the most of being redeemed. We're redemption people. We're Easter people. We have a message to proclaim, and it talks about a God whose love is unbelievable. He takes us from nothing and makes us something, so we should do something in response to what he's done for us. You get it? It ties in with Luke 6. Try to do those things. Are they tough? Sure. But try to do them because of who we are. We are God's people, a holy nation, a royal priesthood. He has redeemed us. Second remembrance. This goes back to the very beginning of this old guy being a young pastor. And I did quick math at the first service to figure out how many years ago that is. And I came up with 55. So it's 55 years ago. 55 years ago. Well, not quite, because it happened in June and we're in, what's this month? February. 55 minus those months. I've been to seminary. I've been in school forever. You go through grade school. They send you to high school. You go to college. You go to seminary. All you've been in is classrooms. 1 year of internship, very helpful, trying to teach you something practical. All this education. So I'm ready. I'm prepared. I'm a pastor. I got a thing on the wall, certificate of ordination. I somewhere have a folder that says, you are a graduate of a seminary. College too. High school, I suppose. Lost that one a long time ago. Anyway, I'm prepared. I'm equipped. I'm ready. Second week. Early morning hours. I would conk out at night. Sandy, my wife, would read until 2 a.m. I'd get up at 6. She'd get up at 10. That was the way it was in those days. So I'm fast asleep. 1:30, maybe 12:30, 1, 2 o'clock. Phone rings. My first impulse is, I'm dreaming. Phone keeps ringing. I'm dreaming. Phone keeps ringing. That's the phone. I stumble to the phone. On the other line is Clarence Burnt. I'll never forget Clarence. Wonderful guy. Funny how these people stay in your mind. Privilege of ministry, folks. You can't describe it. You have to live it. Clarence Burnt, he was a member of the church, and he was the kind of guy in the church. I'd been there 2 weeks, but after I was there 10 minutes, I knew Clarence. He was just that kind of a guy. Some people are like that. Some people, it takes a while to get to know them. Some people, instant. This was an instant guy. He was also, in that town, there was a volunteer fire company, and that was a big deal. And they fought fires. And Clarence was on a night call. There had been a tree, fell on a car or something, and the firemen were there. And one of the firemen was Elmer Rodenbach, 37 years old, husband, father of a 4-year-old. Elmer's wife, Loretta, 4-year-old son, Stacy, were at the local hospital. They wanted to see the pastor. I was the pastor. I was prepared. After that phone call, I wanted to crawl back in bed. I didn't know what to do. I must have missed the class that taught you what to do at 1:30 in the morning when a crisis call comes in. I get in my car, drive to the hospital, uttering a silent prayer, Lord, may I get a flat tire. I get to the hospital with 4 inflated tires. I'm ushered into a small room. You can still see it. There's a grieving widow. Her life has just been turned totally upside down. And there's a little guy that doesn't know what's going on. I have no idea what happened in that room. I don't know what I said. I don't know what I did. But I do know this. During my whole ministry in that congregation, every time, I would be in the presence of Loretta, she would say the same thing. I can hear her saying it. Pastor, we don't know what we would have done if you had not been there that night. I don't know what I did. I don't know what I said. But I learned a lesson, a valuable lesson. And that lesson is simple. Sometimes being there for another is just being there. It's just being present. It's trying to be Christ to them in that place. And that's what means so much. One verse comes to mind in that regard, and I love this verse, always have. Galatians chapter 6, 2nd verse. Bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Simple words. That's what we're called to be about, making God's love in Christ come alive. We are the people of God. We are a chosen race. We are a holy people. Let's be about doing that. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to go to seminary. They didn't teach me that there. I learned that along the way, hopefully. We can all be present to each other in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of upset, in the midst of adversity, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of uncertainty. We can be there for one another. Being present is sometimes all it takes. You need to know, I could talk about things like this until you were all asleep. And I have other things I could talk about, and I gathered these together this morning in 46 minutes. But I'm going to skip the next couple and go to the last one. I hate to do that, because each of the others, I think, was significant. If you really want to see it, is that online from the early service? I don't know. If you want to go back, I don't think you'll do this, but I won't even tell you. I'm just going to skip to the end because the clock is ticking. And actually, when I started this morning, I was driving in and I thought to myself, you know, every time you've preached there, your sermons have been longer than the one before. And some people remind me of that. And I could name them but won't. Others politely say, oh, it wasn't bad. Then they turn to their spouse and say, thought that would never end. That's okay. But I was driving in and I was thinking to myself, this is going to be short. You know, you had no time to prepare. These folks are lucky. You didn't even have a week to get ready, or 2 days, or 1 day, or half a day. 2 hours would have been plenty. I didn't have that. So I thought to myself, this is I'm offering you a bonus, a shorter sermon. And lo and behold, there's a clock back there. And I looked at it at the first service and I thought, I think that clock goes up 2 minutes at a time. Because it obviously cannot be that time. But apparently it is. So, to the point, I'm skipping to the end. And here's the end. This is part of your experience, as well as mine. Because it's located about 100 feet from here. You look confused, Paul. I'm talking about the meditation garden. Have you all seen the meditation garden? You know the meditation garden behind the church? If you haven't seen it, take a look at it so you know what I'm going to talk about next. The meditation garden, for those who know it, has undergone a bit of a transformation. Let me tell you a little bit about the garden. The garden goes back to early days of my ministry here. A gracious couple in the congregation had moved here from California. And when they were in California, the Los Angeles area, They had attended Robert Schuller's Crystal Cathedral, and there was an annual pastor's conference, and they said, "Pastor, you have to go." And I said, "That sounds great, but I can't do that this year." I didn't want to go. Well, I kind of had some thoughts on Robert Schuller. I didn't want to go to the Institute. So every year they'd come the same thing with a brochure. And at one point I thought, now what do you do? You've been rude for 3 years, 4 years, do it. It was a wonderful experience. Some wonderful presenters, fantastic insights. I still have some notes from those days. But one of the things I'll never forget is the grounds, if you've ever been out there. They have these pathways, and on the floor or on the sidewalks are scripture stones. So I came back and I talked to Bill Battaji, who was the chairman of our property committee, and I said, "I've been to the Crystal Cathedral. We have this spot out here. We can't build on it because of water issues, and maybe we can make it into a garden." And there were some other things happening. We had lost a young mother in this congregation, and there was a request to inter some ashes out there, and we thought about that and concluded, if we do it for one person, you have to do it for every person. You'd have little cemeteries all over the place. So we turned it into a meditation garden with a place for cremains. Beautiful garden was developed by Bill Battaji. Fall a year ago, not last fall, fall a year ago, I forget the name of the storm. I think it was Isabel or Isabella or some unwelcome name. If that's your name, I apologize. Anyway, it wiped out the garden pretty much. It was September or October. And we couldn't do anything to restore the garden because it wasn't the right time to plant. So it sat that way for a while. It sat that way during a February wedding, which had been planned before the garden got wiped out. So the couple was envisioning this beautiful venue for their garden, and we're sitting in the midst of dead bushes and grass that's brown as can be. But I used that wedding as an illustration to the couple and the families gathered. You know, this is going to come back. God has a way of restoring things. That's his way. And sure enough, he did. Tom Siegfried and the property folks restored that garden bigger and better than ever that spring. This spring a year ago. Fast forward to last fall. We all know what happened. We all know what the garden looks like now. Here's the point. What I told that couple and families gathered for the wedding in February, I tell you this day, what looks deader than a doornail out there, it's going to come back. It's going to be green again. It's going to be life out there again. And that's the journey we all make through this life. Birth, new garden, life, blooming garden, death, hurricane-attacked garden. It's coming back, folks. That's the way it is with God's love. It's always renewing. It's always recreating. So we go from nothing to birth, through life to death. Each and every one of us will travel that same road. And then when things end here and the bush looks dead, what happens to it? It comes back again. Thanks to what God has done for us through a cross, through the death and resurrection of his Son. That's the life cycle, and we're part of it, and we should rejoice. We are God's people. We are a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Let's live like it, and let's remember that when we're finished here, there's another chapter. This is what Jesus says, good words. I am the resurrection and the life, says the Lord. He who believes in me, though he die, which we will, yet shall he live, which we will. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Underline it. Shall never die. What a promise. What a hope. What a way to live. What a way to die. And what a way to live again. End of Plan B. Amen.